In programming, we work with a lot of data. And this data is often found in various formats. And one of the most common formats are going to be lists. So just lists of data. And a lot of times that data comes back to us ordered in some way, whether it be alphabetic, numeric, based on our favorites. Just some type of hierarchy exists in that data, and it is ordered based on that. Because data comes back to us ordered most frequently from APIs, web services, from users, from databases, or from flat files, it doesn't really matter where the data comes from. Most of the time it's in some form of order. And for that, we use what are called arrays. Arrays are really just ordered lists of data. Now, you might be wondering a little bit about ordered lists. Maybe it's not 100% crystal clear. So let's go ahead and make it absolutely clear. When we're talking about arrays, they are simply ordered lists. And those lists are ordered numerically inside the array. And so let's talk about an ordered list really quick that we can create and turn into an array. If I have been asked a question many times in my life, I have been asked, what are my favorite places that I have been? So, favorite places. And as always, people want you to rank them based on your most favorite and on. Now, out of this list, because they're asking for favorite places, they're not asking you for really places you don't like. They're asking you for places that you really like. So most of the time, you're going to list them based on how you feel about them, and that is going to be the order. So it's not alpha ordering, it's not numeric ordering. I'm ordering based on how I feel about them. But when I take that and I structure it into data, I still have to maintain that order, even though the order is based on how I feel, not based on alphabetical order or numeric order. So the way we handle this in JavaScript is arrays are numerically ordered. In other words, they hold everything in an order, and so no matter how subjective the order is, we have at least something that we can determine where things are and in what order they are inside of our list. And we do that with numbers. So let's take our generic favorite places. So I really enjoyed being in the Erzgebirge in Germany when I was there. It was a really great place. And then I also liked being in Kuala Lumpur, and that's in Malaysia. And then I really love the Uinta Mountains, and that's Utah, USA. So that's my list, all right? Those are my 3 favorite places in order. Now, because we have an ordered list right here, and this is the order they need to be in, we are going to go ahead and use one of the most common data structures we have in pretty much any programming language there is, and especially in JavaScript, we're going to use the array. Now, for arrays, because they are numerically ordered and they maintain order, we simply need to create the array placing things in the order that we have defined. And in this case, we're placing them in order based on how I feel about them being my favorite places. And we start out with the Erzgebirge. So if I'm going to create an array in JavaScript, really all I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a variable name that will hold my array. And like we talked about when we talked about variables, really I'm just creating a bucket in memory that's referenced by the human readable name that I'm providing, and in that bucket I'm going to have this array with everything ordered the way that I want it. So var favorite places is what I'm going to call it, so that I know exactly what that array or that bucket contains. And here is the syntax for an array. We use the square brackets to define an array. And inside of that array, we can add new items to our array simply by separating them with a comma and then providing the value for that item in between these commas. Here I'm adding strings to my array. And so the Erzgebirge in Germany is going to be the first one. So I'm going to put that first in my array literal that I'm creating. The second one is going to be Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And then my third one is going to be the Uinta Mountains in Utah, USA. So here I have myself an array created, and that is simply by using this array syntax. Let me go ahead and push it down a little bit so that we can see it a little bit clearer. I'll go ahead and tab these in so everything's lined up. All right, so square brackets indicate an array is being created, and this is called an array literal because we are literally creating the array as we define it. So in that array, of course, is going to be referenced by this memory space that we're creating called favorite places. And the first one in the array ends up being the first one indexed in that array. Which leads us to, once we have this data inside of an array and it's in order, how do we get that data back out in order? And that is where indexing comes into play. Now, arrays in JavaScript are zero indexed. So let's go ahead and make a note about that. Zero indexed. What that means is that unlike how we normally count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, where we start at the number 1, in JavaScript, we begin indexing arrays at 0, meaning that the first element in the array is at 0, and that makes it the first. The second item is at 1. So let's see how that works really quick. Let's do a console. Actually, let's just pull the value out really quick. So let's do let first place equal. So I'm defining a variable, and now I'm going to pull my first place selection out of that array using indexing. And I'm going to show you how everything is zero indexed by doing this. Now when we're indexing an array, all we do is we take, of course, the variable name that holds our array in it, and then we use the exact same syntax that we use to create an array to index it. We just use the square brackets, and then we provide the index that we want to pull out in order to get that value. Now, you might be tempted to use a 1 right there in order to pull out the first item in your array. Problem is that you would be wrong. Let's do console.log, and let's log that and see what we actually pulled out. So let's run this really quick. You'll see it pulled out Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but that is my number 2. And again, that goes back to the fact that arrays are zero indexed. In other words, they always start at 0. So the first item we put into an array will always be at 0. So now that we've changed that, let's run it again, and we should have the Erzgebirge in Germany. So Erzgebirge. So this is how we index an array. We simply use the same format that we used, the square brackets, when we created the array. We simply go ahead and use that same format, but this time we provide the index that we know our entry is at. And then that pulls out that value for us. Now, of course, did we really need to store it into a variable? No, because we've already got it stored in this array. So I really could have just done this. Console.log, and then just printed out the value that is returned when I index the array at 0. So let's go ahead and see. We should see Erzgebirge, Erzgebirge. All right. Hopefully that is crystal clear. If you don't understand what I did right here, you'll need to talk to the instructor or a tutor. Because really, when we do this, all we're doing is creating a new variable. We're asking for the value that resides at index 0 within this array, and we're just returning that here to this variable, and we're just getting another reference to what is stored in there, and then we're printing it out. So instead of wasting my time creating a variable, all I did was simply indexed the array. The value that was at this index was returned by the statement, and therefore the console.log had that value to print it out. So make sure you're clear on that. Now, what if at some point later on I decide, maybe I go and I visit Australia or something like that, and I decide that Australia is more beautiful than the Uinta Mountains in Utah in the USA. So if that happens, I may need to adjust my number 3. Maybe it's not quite as cool as the Erzgebirge or Kuala Lumpur, but maybe it is better than the Uintas. So maybe I have to update that. Now, if we think about it, the Uinta Mountains is my third choice. If we look at my human readable list, it is my third choice. So I might be tempted to update number 3 in my array. So let's go ahead and do that and see what happens. Let's say we're going to go ahead and add Australia to it. So let's do favorite places. Now, when we're assigning values to an array, we simply use the same indexing syntax, and we're updating number 3, or we think we are, so I'm going to go ahead and put a 3 there. And then we're going to go ahead and do Australia. And then let's pull out what we have at 3 and see what we get. Favorite places, we're going to index 3. And then we're going to run it. And we get Australia. But if we remember, arrays are 0 indexed. So let's run through all of the indices of our array really quick and see what we're actually, or where our Australia actually lives. So let's go ahead and do that. 2, 3. Let's do this. 0, 1, 2, 3. And I'm doing the 3 because we said we added it to 3. So now if we console.log these last entries, we should be able to see what we've got inside of our array now. Let's comment these other ones out so they're not confusing. They're not confusing our output. All right, we actually have 4 items in our array. We have the Erzgebirge, which is true. If we look at our list, we've got the Erzgebirge, we've got Kuala Lumpur as number 2, we've got Uinta Mountains as number 3, and now we actually have a 4th. We've got Australia. And that is because when we added Australia, we treated our array as though it was indexed by 1 instead of indexed by 0. And so we really did actually add a 4th one because we have 0, 1, 2, 3, which gives us 4 items in our list. So we really didn't update our 3rd one. We just simply made Australia our 4th one. Now we can fix this by simply realizing that it's 0 indexed, and 0 is number 1, 1 is number 2, and 3 is number, let's start over again. 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 3. So we actually needed to do that to a 2 in order to override our Uinta Mountains one. So now let's run it. And now we have the Erzgebirge, Kuala Lumpur, Australia, and undefined. We get an undefined because I'm still trying to index it, and there's nothing at that index in our array. Therefore, JavaScript is sending us back the undefined, telling us that there's no value in there. Now we might run into a situation where, hey, we want to put Australia there, but we don't want to lose the Uinta Mountains, so we want to move Uinta Mountains to 4 and put Australia in the place of 3. And we can accomplish that. We can accomplish that pretty easy. What we can do is we can say favorite places and index 3, which is the 4th spot. And we can say favorite places and index our 2. And then down here, we can leave Australia at 2. And now let's see if that worked. Maybe we now have Australia at 2, so it'll be our 3rd, and then maybe we have Utah in our 4th. Let's go ahead and run this really quick. Erzgebirge, Germany, Kuala Lumpur, Australia, and now the Uintas. So we didn't lose it. All we did was we took the values and reassigned where they are located in our array based on index. So in this example right here, we simply took what was indexed at 2, so that value, which happens to be Uinta Mountains, Utah, USA, and we put that value into the 3rd index, which is actually our 4th spot in the array, and then we went ahead and overrode what was at 2 with the new value of Australia, and we rearranged the order of our array simply by using indexes and identifying where stuff is and then moving it around in our array. So in this video, we have just covered arrays and the syntax for an array literal, which is just using the square brackets and commas to separate values. We learned about indexing, which means pulling a value out of the array using the index that we want. We covered that arrays are zero indexed, meaning they start at 0 for the first place in the array rather than 1. We learned about assigning values to an array using an index. In other words, we're putting a value at a particular index in the array. We also covered rearranging values in an array in order to get something in the right index that we want. And then, of course, we indexed the array to pull out the values so we could print them to the console. This has been a pretty light overview of arrays. And in our next videos, we're going to start moving into array methods as well as iterating over arrays.